My name is Clifford White. I'm a JTech student, and today we're going to be talking about full floating axles. This is a full floating axle. Full floating axles basically for trucks, 4x4s, and SUVs. Torque is transmitted in a separate axle shaft that carries the weight, that carries the power and no weight. And when repairing one, you can actually leave the wheel on the studs itself and actually remove the axle by removing these nuts here. The differential comes out, and once the straps are off, it comes out in a chunk, what they call a chunk. And this is a disc brake set up in the rear. And all the weight is actually suspended here on these brackets, these mounted brackets here and here. And this is a full floating axle. First, I want to go ahead and make a correction I said earlier. This is the only one this is the only differential, which is a semi-floating that comes out the full chunk as far as the rear diff once it's unbolted from here, and then you unbolt the main nut here to take the whole thing out. This full floating is integrated into the axle, so you will have to remove these two strap bolts here to remove it out. And you have to do the same thing on the 3/4, which is here. Now, to do some basic repairs for this, you will use shims as far as the when you replace the bearing for the axle to slide in, so that way the weight is put here and here. On the semi-floating, same thing. You will replace, if you want to replace the bearing, you replace the bearing which is pressed on. After you slide the axle out, you replace the bearing and reassemble. On this one here, we already disassembled the rear end, this side here, if you will, and the bearings are pressed in, which are here, and you can use pretty much a nice bearing press to have it slipped in, pressed in, and that's how you would do just one of the basic repairs you could do on this type of rig. And one more thing I need to add about a full floating, as I described earlier, that all the weight is supported by the housing, which is actually here. This is the housing, and these brackets that I explained earlier are here when the cab is actually mounted down onto the axle carrying the weight. Okay. Now, this is a semi-floating, which means the weight is actually supported here and here on these points here. You also have a bearing here, and you also have to, whenever you do an axle job on here, you would pull this out, replace the bearing, and slide it back in. This has a this has a chunk that comes out by pulling this assembly out. Semi-floating axles are basically for cars and light-duty trucks, limited to capacity, but also lighter, cheaper to manufacture. The axles carry both weight and transmits the torque to the wheels from the engine to the transmission to the rear diff, which is here, and out to the wheels. And again, the weight is supported on that bearing there and a support bracket here, thus semi-floating. Now, this is called a 3/4. All the weight is supported on the shaft itself, which houses the axle. Floating, 3/4 floating are for light cars and trucks, not meant for vehicles that carry a lot of weight. Bearing, which is located between the axle casing and the hub axle shaft, which is here. And this is where the weight is put on.
I'm not American.
And the differential is called the differential comes out once you release the screws here, and supported by shims as far as displacement and stability when you put the new axles in.